Our speaker this month is well known, not only Bay Area, but worldwide. And you've probably thought of his name or cursed him when you've approached a door that doesn't seem to open correctly, or a water faucet that doesn't work, or a toilet that you can't figure out how to flush. And so with that, I am honored to introduce Don Norman.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Actually, my problem is not toilets that I can't figure out how to flush. It's toilets that flush when I don't want them to. So doors, yeah. I've been haunted by doors. I mean, I was a psychologist. I was studying fundamental principles of human cognition, and I thought I was writing serious scientific papers. And I'm famous for doors you can't open. But eventually I said, okay, maybe that's what my calling is. So what happened was that I had been sort of doing some early research in a field that eventually became HCI. Published a book with my research group at UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego, UCSD. And so we published a book called User-Centered System Design, UCSD, right? And to my great surprise, oh, that's where user interface and user-centered research came from the title, I'm told. Well, I took a year's sabbatical, and I went off to Cambridge, England. And I couldn't work the light switches, and I couldn't operate the doors, and I couldn't work the water faucets or taps. You know, the world has standards that left is hot and right is cold, not in England. And I couldn't open the doors. I would try to push a door that should be slid, or pull a door that should be lifted up. And so I then began to realize that the same principles we were studying for computers applied to everyday things. Now, mind you, the computers that we were studying in those days were all command line systems, and Unix in particular. In fact, I guess I first came to fame by writing a paper out of frustration with Unix, where every single program written and every single command line was different. And so I wrote a paper called The Trouble with Unix, which got me into a lot of trouble. Because this was the early days of the internet. It wasn't called the internet, it was called the ARPANET. And it got taken away from me and sent off to Bell Labs, where, well, it was fun. Anyway, in England, I realized that, gee, the same principles applied. And so to my great surprise, I sat down one day and wrote this book. Well, over 6 months. And then I passed the manuscript around. And I remember that, I'm not sure how much longer, I'm not sure which conference. It might have been, for all I know, the very first CHI conference. In fact, before it was called CHI. I met a friend of mine, Bill Verplank, in the elevator, and I had sent him an early manuscript. And Bill said, and I said, how'd you like the book? And he said, it was horrible. I didn't know anything about design, he said. And because I was telling everybody how bad the designers were and what mess, you know, what a nuisance they had done and caused us. He said, look, I'm going to have breakfast with some real designers, so come with me. And he dragged me to breakfast, and there was Shelley Everson and John Reinfrank. And basically, they told me I didn't know what I was talking about when it came to design, and that I was pissed at bad designs, but they were equally pissed. And so it wasn't their fault. It was because nobody was calling upon professional designers. It was all done by engineers. And so actually it took me another year to rewrite the book and change the tone of the book, thank goodness. So the book eventually got published under the title of Poet, The Psychology of Everyday Things, because I was really interested in the fact that, you know, there's a psychology to devices, whether or not I can pick it up or throw it or scratch my back with it. And it's a clever title, Psychology of Everyday Things, P-O-E-T, poet. And I'll come back to that. The book is released to, well, you can tell by the crowd here, people loved it. No, it got released to a zero reception. The New York Times Book Review, for some reason, decided to review it, and the review said, "This is one of the stupidest books I've ever come across." The person has no idea about what's going on. I talked to my friends in industry, and they said there's nothing new in it. This was in the days of Microsoft DOS. And there's no redeeming virtue. Oh, by the way, he thinks he has a sense of humor, but he doesn't. So that was my beginning of switching from being a psychologist to a designer. And so let me give you a little bit of my history. But before I begin, actually, let me dedicate this talk to Cliff Nass. Cliff was he was a very strange and wonderful and exciting person who lived his lovely life and was always late for meetings and always carrying more stuff in his hands than he could hold in his hands and always running in late and just filled with brilliant ideas and great enthusiasm. And as some of you may know, he was a professor at Stanford and he recently died at a relatively young age. And that's a real loss to the community. So actually, Cliff started as a mathematician. I started off as an electrical engineer. So I started off as an MIT nerd in course 6, those of you who know the numbers. And then I decided I really wanted to work with computers, so I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get a degree in computers because that's where they came from, right? But ENIAC. But there weren't anybody there who did computers, and they kept saying, "Oh, stay around, we're going to start a computer science department. You can be one of the first people." But I got a master's degree in electrical engineering, and just then the psychology department revolutionized itself, and they got a new chair who has a PhD in physics, and they were hiring a new professor with a PhD in mathematics. And so the chair, they gave a talk in the E department, and I said, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I want to build computers, and they want to study computers, namely this thing. And so the chair said, I didn't know anything at all about psychology. Wonderful that he invited me in. So I accidentally became a psychologist. And it was only after I got my PhD and had my first job that I actually started to learn psychology. Because what I did was what was called auditory psychophysics, and how the ear worked, which is really straight engineering. Well, at my first job, which was at Harvard, I started studying human memory, short-term and long-term, and starting to understand, try to put together information processing models of human cognition. And the department at San Diego started, the university started, and so I got hired along with a bunch of other people. So I was at UCSD the second year of the psychology department, which was, I think, the third year of the university. So I started at UCSD before any students had graduated. And we invented a field called human information processing that eventually became cognitive psychology, that eventually led to cognitive science. And so in my studies, I was looking at a whole bunch of human behavior, including how we actually do things. And about then, the 3 Mile Island accident happened, at the nuclear power accident. And so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission called in a bunch of psychologists to say, those operators, they made horrible mistakes. So why did they make all those mistakes? And I had just published a paper on human error. And so I was called in as part of that team. And when we analyzed the nuclear power station, we said, if you wanted to design something to cause error, you could not have done a better job. 4,000 knobs and controls. And they're all arranged in straight lines. And the engineer says, oh, we need 400 switches. Let's order 400 identical looking switches. And they take out their straight edges, they draw a straight line, and they go boom, 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 boom. And they wonder why there might be confusion or difficulties. And worse, They always did the control room last. And there were actually cases of control rooms, not in 3 Mile Island, but other ones where they would number them. You know, this is pump 1, 2, 3, 7, 6, 4. What? Well, if they wired one up wrong, they didn't bother to rewire it. They just changed the numbers. So that got me to realize that my background might be perfect. That I had an engineering background, I understood what was going on, and I actually had a psychology background. And that sort of started me on this weird new career. And it started, I guess, with looking at early computers and the difficulties we all had using them, and the fact that they were all designed by the programmers themselves. But they were, to be fair, they weren't designed for everybody. So Unix, whatever its problems, was a brilliant, brilliant design. And it was designed for the private use of the people who developed it at Bell Labs. And they were as surprised as anybody else that it took off and became a pretty worldwide phenomenon. And some of their problems were simply due to the lack of tools. So that the reason that every single program that was written was different was that, well, when you're writing a program, there's lots of bookkeeping stuff you have to do that you hate. It's not it doesn't really tax you in any way. It's just a nuisance you have to do. And handling the arguments is one of those. So everybody just did it in whatever way they wanted. And in fact, when Macintosh was developed, one of the brilliant insights they had was that programmers don't like to write that, so we'll have a library. And so when you want to do something, we simply call upon the library, and that standardizes the way things work. That was really one of the keys to the success of the Macintosh in making things uniform. But I'm getting ahead of my story. The book Poet was published by Basic Books, and the editor who was its champion left Basic Books before it was published. And so there was nobody there who cared about the book, and then the New York Times Book Review kind of killed it. And so a few years later, though, some editors at Doubleday discovered the book and said they really liked it. And so they went to Basic Books and said, you're not going to publish a paperback. Can we have permission to publish a paperback? And so Basic said, sure. It's a way of getting extra money. So Doubleday paid them some money, and they published the paperback. And they said, and of course, we will change the name. And I said, what? No, it's a wonderful name, Poet. You know, all my friends love it. And they said, look, you're supposed to be a psychologist. You're supposed to understand people. When you go to the bookstore, how do you choose the books? So you go down and you're looking at the back end of the books. That's all you see is the rear, right, the spine. And so the title is an abstract. And it says psychology of, well, first of all, if it says psychology, the bookstore puts it in psychology. And who is going in the bookstore to look at psychology books? It's people who want to know why they have trouble with their mother or their children or whatever. And no one from design goes and looks there. So changing the title, Design of Everyday Things, made sense. And I didn't trust them, so I went out and did my own research. And I went out to, well, I followed my own advice. I went out and I talked to bookstore owners and to bookstore clerks, and they all agreed that that was a far better title. So in any event, it came out with a new title in paperback and started selling much, much more. Now, as usual, there's no way of knowing what caused it. Was it the fact that it was paperback and therefore cheaper? Was it the fact it was a better title? Or was it the fact that time had passed and the design community was starting to discover the book? Anyway, time has passed. It's now 25 years since that book was published. It still sells remarkably well. In fact, last week, the new book that Amazon is selling was #1 on a few lists, and the old book, which Amazon still sells, was #3 on these lists. I just don't get it, but it's still selling. But, you know, a lot of things have changed in 25 years. In fact, here's a few things that have changed. Well, here's one thing that hasn't changed. The book introduced a bunch of principles, and I'm going to remind you of them. Even those of you who don't need reminding, a few fundamental principles, and those principles are unchanged. because the principles have to do with the way that people interact with the world, and that hasn't changed in, I don't know, 1,000 years. And it's probably unlikely to change in the near future until we change people, which is starting to happen. But actually, even then, the principles may not change, because I believe the same principles hold if a robot is trying to interact with the world. They have to do with information, with discovery, with... So I kept the principles the same, with one exception. I changed the treatment of affordance to introduce a new concept called signifier, which I'll tell you about later. But the examples were out of date. So I talk about slide projectors. And, what is that, people would say. So the examples were out of date. And I told my publisher that, yeah, I can rewrite it. It'll take a month or two, because I'm going to keep the book the same. I'll just change the examples. And I also promised that if I added new material, I would subtract just as much material and keep the book the same size. Well, yeah, you know about products, right? Feature creep and schedule creep and all that. So it took a long time to write. And the book is now, the 200-page book is now 300 pages. Because I discovered that actually I had to talk about a bit more, and I had to expand. And I knew that some of the concepts gave people trouble, so I changed it. And I couldn't find any of the old photographs or drawings, so I had to do all new drawings and new photographs. And it was fun. So principles didn't change, technology changed. And the technology also changed, not just the examples, but the way we interact with machines. So we didn't do gestures in products in those days. Actually, gestures were kind of around. And when Apple introduced this new wonderful iPhone that used gestures, well, come on, they'd been around for 25 years. What Apple discovered was how to make it affordable. They did it by finding a small company started by a professor and his graduate student in Delaware that had made a cheap, affordable, multi-touch display. The company was going broke. Nobody knew what to do with it. So Apple bought the company and used the technology. But well, the technology changed, the way we interact changed, and I changed. I would hope so in 25 years. Because I started off being basically an engineer, and I ended up and an academic. And I didn't understand business. And I didn't really understand, well, sales and the pressures in getting out a product and the requirements of the installed base. And so I added 2 chapters at the end, one which I call Design Thinking and the other Design in the World of Business. And I'll talk about that too. We go through the book. So 25 years later, I rewrote it, and I said, gee, this book lasted from 1988 to 2013, so I have to write a book that will also be relevant in 2038. I was lucky when I wrote the first edition that even though I had been doing research on computers, I didn't mention them. Because if I would have talked about computers, you would laugh at it today, and you wouldn't even be interested in the book, because there's no relationship between the machines we use then, command language machines, and today's machines. But if I talk about doors and light switches and waterfalls, it's the same problems. They have not changed. So I tried hard to talk about doors and light switches and similar things, or general principles that won't go bad in 25 years. So, what did I talk about? After I worked at UCSD for a while, getting more and more involved in the new high-tech revolution that was happening up here, and I was doing work already with NASA Ames on aviation safety, and I was starting to consult for Xerox Park, I guess it was called in those days. That is this very building. In fact, I think I started consulting before this building existed. And Apple. And I finally decided, I was starting to read the computer magazines and going to computer conferences before I read the technical journals and before I was going to scientific conferences, and that was telling me something. So I took an early retirement, the first of my many failed retirements, from the University of California, San Diego. So I'm now professor emeritus there. And I came to Apple, where I started off being something called an Apple Fellow and then ended up being something called a vice president. And I remember in the early days when I first arrived, several different things happened. First of all, they were about to release a product. I thought this was wonderful. Wow, what a product. It's going to revolutionize the world, I thought. So I watched its release. It failed. And Apple brought out a second version, and it failed. And I can't remember whether it brought out a third version or not, but it failed. So I started to understand the nature of products. Here was something I thought was fantastic that would change the world, and it failed. And I watched another product be released, and it was going to change the world, they said, and it failed. So the second one was called Newton. And the first one was this weird product that it took pictures, and it didn't need film. It had some problems. You couldn't see what you were taking a picture of. There was no display on the back. But that wasn't the problem, because no camera had displays on the back. And it could only take 8 pictures at a time. That's all its memory would hold. But that wasn't the problem, because that's all a roll of film would take, is 8 pictures. The problem was, when you took the pictures, then what did you do with them? It wasn't easy to get them into your computer. And once you got it into the computer, what did you do with it? We didn't have inkjet printers. And if you wanted to send it to somebody else, which was what we thought it was, a contractor would be in the field, would see a problem, would take a picture, and send it to other people. Well, that means you would take the phone and plug it into the modem, right? And at 300 baud, you guys may not even know what baud means.
Yummy, yummy.
Yummy. 300 baud means 30 bytes per second. Not 30 kilobytes, not 30 megabytes, 30. So, I mean, it was kind of ahead of its time. And a product ahead of its time is just, as bad as, in fact, it's worse than not having a product because you're losing money on it. And the Newton, well, we got carried away, or they got carried away. Is Larry Kessler still here, or did he leave? Larry Kessler was the vice president in charge of Newton, and I remember one day I went to him with my list of problems. Here's a list of things I think is a problem with Newton. And Larry laughed and laughed and laughed, and why are you laughing? He said, because my list is bigger than yours. But he couldn't get the engineers to listen. The engineers were going to ship the product, and they didn't give a damn what that stupid vice president would say. And Newton did handwriting recognition. And it used a special algorithm developed by these brilliant Russian mathematicians that did a special encoding and then nearest neighbor matching, word by word by word. And if you knew anything about handwriting recognition, you were really impressed with how well it worked. The problem is, if you didn't know anything about handwriting recognition, you would say, well, it's not recognizing my handwriting. It's not working. And the real problem was that when it missed the word, it didn't give you something that was close. You'd say, oh, I see. I need to make that line longer. It gave you something that seemed to have no relationship. So Newton failed because people yelled at it, and that was one of the problems. My personal opinion is if Newton had never said that they had handwriting recognition, it would have succeeded. It actually had some really brilliant components. And suppose they would have said, there's a keyboard. You can get this keyboard, and there's a stylus. You can tap and type away, which isn't that much different from what we do today. And they would have said, oh, by the way, there's also handwriting recognition. You can try it if you like. But instead, they made that the centerpiece, and it didn't work. Now, interestingly enough, I was at a conference a couple months ago, and I met the guy who started the CEO of Evernote. And he turns out he was a Russian mathematician. And he found out I used to be at Apple, and we started talking about it. And he yelled and yelled about those Apple stupid people. And so I told him about my theory of the problem with Newton handwriting was that you didn't recognize, the word that it gave you had nothing to do with the word you typed in. At least it did mathematically, but not on the surface. And he said, that's Apple's fault. Apple, which is famous for its secrecy, wouldn't tell him what they wanted this for. They bought the handwriting recognition system from them and wouldn't say what for. So I had to understand English words. So they're in Russia. So what they did was they got all the Beatles songs and they fed it the Beatle words. No wonder it didn't work, he said. If they would have told us, we could have done it differently. Yeah, well, that's life in business. I remember also when we were just releasing a laptop, and I thought it had lots of problems. So I went over to see the vice president in charge of laptops. I spent a whole hour with him talking. And at the end of the hour, he said, this has been fun. I really enjoyed it. I want you to come back. We're going to have more conversations. But, I have to do some real work now. And once again, I began to realize that talking abstract principles and talking about fundamental approaches about how we ought to interact with our machines, come on, this guy has to ship it. He has to ship it maybe in the next week, and there's all sorts of problems. There's a list of 50 problems he has to solve, like, the software is crashing all the time. And I'm talking there about, the revolution that might come about when we can all walk around with our computers. Yeah, that's fun, but it's got nothing to do with the product. So it was a rude awakening. I was at Apple during the exciting years when it was failing. It was filled with bright, intelligent, creative people, a number of whom are in this audience. But one of the problems was that we couldn't ship a product. John Scully would do that to me. He would call me in his office every week, say, Don, stop everything you're doing. I have a great new idea. You told me that last week. Oh, this is a better idea. And I actually thought he had bright ideas. He did understand what was coming. But he didn't realize that this idea would take 200 people 2 years to implement. You can't change your mind the next week. And back in those days, we had a really crappy operating system. And everybody knew it. But it was really hard to change because every time you'd get off on a course, people would say, oh, God, if we really do it this way, none of the applications we have today will work anymore. And so people will desert us and move to Microsoft. So, we got to go back and do the old stuff. And we went back and forth. It is hard. The way that Apple made it, I think, is when Steve Jobs came in, he was a filthy bastard, right? But he kept you focused. Kept you focused. And Apple was in really bad shape. So if we lost some customers to Microsoft, it wouldn't matter. And so Steve Jobs was not fun to work with. I'm told. And he saved Apple because of the intense focus and good taste. And I have to say I'm told because he fired me. Nothing personal, he didn't know me. He fired me and closed down the group, which probably was a good decision because we were the advanced technology group, which essentially is a research group. And when you're a company going broke, research is a luxury. But he fired all the VPs. If you were vice president, you were gone. And I suspect that his philosophy was, Apple is in trouble, we don't really know why, it can't seem to get its act together, it's not focused, so I'm just going to get rid of the executive team and start over again. Which is the way it works in Silicon Valley. So, what else has changed? Well, Apple's use of gestures is a good example of what has changed. Emotion. When I wrote The Design of Everyday Things, it was all about how do you understand something? How do you prevent yourself from being confused? What are the fundamental principles? And those principles are things like affordances and conceptual models and discoverability, what you can do, and feedbacks, what was happening, and constraints that help help constrain you, help say this only works in this condition and this doesn't work in that condition, so you can't make mistakes. Those principles haven't changed. But what's interesting is Apple developed a new gesture language for the iPhone, and they threw away the principles. So can you discover how to use it? There's no real easy way. How do you know whether you should swipe up or swipe down or swipe left or swipe right or swipe with one finger or two fingers or three fingers or one tap or double tap or triple tap? Even on the iPod, which has earphones and three little buttons, and the bottom button is softer and the top button is louder. That's good mapping. Higher means is up, higher. And the middle button, well, you push it once and it starts the song, and push it again, it stops the song. Push it twice, it moves to the next song. Push it 3 times and it goes back to the previous song. Push it twice and hold, and it goes fast forward. Push it 3 times and hold, and it goes backwards. Unless another phone call has come in which case if you push it once, it transfers you to the phone call. But if you don't want to pick up the phone call, you push it and you hold it, and then that Well, how many of you are watching YouTube and you want to start and stop it, and you have to go make the mouse or your finger find that tiny little triangle or vertical bar on the bottom left, or you want it to go full screen, you have to find that tiny little full screen thing on the bottom right, and one day you accidentally tap in the middle of the screen and it stops. And you tap again and it starts. Oh, I don't have to use that. I can just tap in the middle. But how would you know? And what if you double tap? It fills the whole screen. So you can now save yourself a lot of effort. You just double tap and there's the whole screen, and with a single tap it starts and stops. But how would you ever discover that? And no feedback. How many times have you taken your phone out to show somebody something, or take out your iPad, and when they take it from you, they accidentally touch something, and it goes off in some bizarre state, and you have no idea what they did or no idea how to recover, and Apple says, what's the problem? Just hit that little bottom button and start over. Come on. Once upon a time, we had this command called undo. Brilliant command. Where'd it go? In fact, I think the only system that actually makes sense today is, believe it or not, Microsoft's Windows 8 for the phone. For the phone. Or the tablet. Because, look, the iOS, they decided to throw away those menus, take up a lot of space, throw away those icons, just so you'd play with it. And Android basically copied Apple. So it's the same system. They started off with menus. But you hold a long press gave you a menu, except you do a long press and nothing would happen. Oh, did I press the right spot or long enough? Or, oh, maybe there's no menu here. So then they started giving you symbols, 3 vertical dots, which meant there was a menu there. And then they finally gave up on that. And so now there are no menus at least that I know of. Well, no, there's a couple every so often, right? And Microsoft, though, which has really good UX people, I thought has done a pretty good job of starting over again and rethinking how it should be used, and letting little edges peek on the side or the top or bottom. So, hey, if I swipe left, I'll see that, giving you hints about what's there. It's called discoverability. And we've lost discoverability, and we've lost feedback, and we've lost a good conceptual model often. But the bizarre thing is this. Remember, I started this rant talking about emotion. The bizarre thing is I ask people to do things on their iPhone. I say, oh, change the time zone. And they say, sure, that's simple. And they say, look, you just go here, and you go here, and then, no, here. No, that's not it. And then you have to remember, by the way, to uncheck, set the time zone automatically. And they go back and forth, and then they finally figure it out, and they do it, and they say, there, wasn't that simple? And that gives rise to another interesting principle of design. So we all teach it's not the user's fault, right? It's the design's fault. Well, if I'm a designer and I want my product to succeed, I want you to think it's your fault. So when I can't do this with the Apple iPhone, I say, oh yeah, I forgot, I'm sorry, I forgot how to do it. It's my fault. In the Newton, when you couldn't understand your handwriting, you blamed the Newton, and the Newton failed. When Palm came out with its handwriting system, first of all, it did it letter by letter. And second of all, it taught you a special alphabet. You had to learn a special alphabet to write. And third of all, it actually wasn't as good as the Newton system, except it was letter by letter. So if it misses 10% of the letters, well, that was one letter every couple words. And you could still probably read the word. And on top of that, you'd look at it and you'd say, you know, I meant to write now, and it thought I wrote how. Oh, I see, that first bar on the end was too long, and that's why. And so you blamed yourself. And so Palm took off. It was your fault. I better be more careful in writing, you say. And that's, I think, what's happened here. They're fun. They're fun to use. They're great entertainment machines. And so emotion dominates. And I really do think emotion dominates. And so 25 years ago, I didn't understand the role of emotion. In those early years, I remember saying, why do we want color screens? Because as a psychologist, I know, you get the same amount of information in black and white as you do in color. Because most of us were just writing text, right? So what difference did it make when I highlighted something, whether it was light gray or whether it was yellow? And I remember that one day I said, I don't understand why everybody in business is buying color screens. So I got a color screen for my machine and took it home just to see what it was like. And at the end, I was convinced, after a few weeks, I was convinced that I was right. There was no advantage to color, but I wasn't going to give it up. And then it slowly dawned on me that, you know, I prefer color television to black and white television, and color movies to black and white movies. Unless the black and white movies make a distinct artistic statement by deliberately being in black and white. So emotion is important, and in 25 years, the field has changed a lot, the field that studies emotion. We didn't really know much about it back in the 1980s, and today a large amount is known, so much so that actually in the interim, I wrote a book called Emotional Design. And so one of the things I was able to do was incorporate emotion into this book. So, expectations. One of the important things in design is, do you match people's expectations? Do I know what to do, and then do I get feedback knowing what happened, and do I actually understand it, and is it the correct thing? Well, one of the big drivers of emotions is expectations, negative emotions. I mean, I have this problem. I don't know if any of the rest of you do, but I'm driving my car along, and I'm driving down, so I don't know, Page Mill Road, and there's a green light a block ahead, and there are really long lights on Page Mill, and I hate them, right? They're so long, and it's green, but I'm afraid as I get closer and closer, it's about to turn red before I get there, right? Well, my stomach tightens up. Why should my stomach tighten up just because the light's going to turn red? It's expectation. And expectations are really important. And one of the examples I like to give, some of you have seen it, it's in my TED Talk, but I'll do it here anyway, because I really like it. I put a piece of wood on the floor, and we'll make it that wide. And I'm going to walk on it, boom, 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 boom. And I don't even have to look, right? I can walk on it, and I can turn around, and I can do one leg, and I can jump, and I can do all sorts of things. Now I'm going to take that same piece of wood and put it 50 meters up in the air. You know, I'm not going to even go near it. Why? I just demonstrated I don't even really have to look. I don't fall off it. I can do this for a long time. When it's on the floor, what's the difference when it's a height? And again, it's the emotional system automatically triggering fear of falling with all sorts of negative consequences that it's automatically, subconsciously figured out for me. And it prevents me from doing my job. In fact, emotions play another role, that if you want to be creative, you want to be in a good mood. That's why the rules of brainstorming are, first of all, try to start early in the morning so you haven't had a bad day already. And second of all, we start off with good food, and we start playing games, and we tell jokes. And the rule is no criticism. So it's going to be very positive, and when you're in a positive mood, the brain changes. It really does. I mean, because you pump hormones through the brain, and that changes the wiring structure and changes the way it responds, and you're very creative. You're very sensitive to changes that happen. In fact, if it's too much, we call it scatterbrained. And so what you really want is you want to be in this really great mood during the creative phase when you're trying to figure out what to do. And then if you're a really good manager, once you figured out what you want to do, you tell people that they have a deadline. And what you also do is you figure out how much time they need and you give them a few months less. And you all know that. When do you get your best work done? It's the day before it's due. There's nothing like a little bit of stress to focus the mind. And that's, again, that's the emotional system. It's hormones pump in, and it gives you, if it's too much, by the way, it's called tunnel vision, and you really get captured by something, and that's not a good state. So you want to have a slight amount of stress or a slight amount of happiness to create creativity or focus. So that's the really important part. And there are other components, too, that have changed. One of them is point of view. So years and years and years ago, when the very first displays were around, there was a religious argument. When you had the thing was filled with text, and I now want to keep reading, right? The fade around out, and I want to read the line below. How do I get to it? So I had arrow keys. I want to read the line below. Do I push the down key? Yeah, see, the old timers remember. Push the down key, or do I push the up key? And the answer is, well, there's no correct answer. Either one is correct, because it depends what you think is happening. What is your conceptual model? Or what is your point of view? And here's the point is, if I'm commanding the text, then I say up, because I want the text to move up so I can see what's below. If I'm commanding the window, I say move down, because I move the window down and I can see what's below it. And it was a big, big, big fight. In the end, it was the window that won. So we moved the window. Well, recently, well, it makes sense. With gesture systems, you touch the screen and you move the stuff, right? So obviously, if I want the text to move up, I push it with my hand and move up. But what happens when you have a trackpad on a PC, and it may be a touch-sensitive screen, or maybe you've been using iPads a lot, and now I go to my PC where I do similar gestures, but it goes the wrong way. Here, the text moves up. Here, if I go, the text moves down. And as you all know, Apple finally decided to try to standardize it, and probably, what percentage of you keep the old way on your Apple computer? See that? It's really hard to change people's behavior. You know about elevators? Elevators are strange devices. With most devices, if I want a light to turn on, I push the button that says on. Or if I want sound to come, I push the button that makes a sound. If I want to control something, I push the control that makes it happen. So in some societies, when elevators were first introduced and there was an up arrow and a down button, you'd say, well, I don't know how to use it because I'm on the 4th floor and I want to go to the 6th, and I don't know where the elevator is. So if the elevator's on the ground floor, I push up. I want it to come up and get me. And the elevator's up down there, I push down. I want it to come down and get me, right? Well, that's the way we use the elevator. We use all the other devices. We tell it what to do. But with the elevator, you give it your intention. So that's one strange thing. Well, there's a new kind of elevator. In the world of technology innovation, new means it's less than 30 or 40 years old. Touch, remember, was 25 years old by the time it got introduced, and everything is old by the time it's really introduced as a product. Well, the new elevator was invented 20, 25 years ago. It's called destination control. There's a bunch of them in San Francisco, and they're starting to populate. And what it is a keypad outside the elevator. And you tell it what floor you want to go to. And it says, go to elevator 3. And you go to elevator 3, And meanwhile, elevator 2 comes and goes, and elevator 6 comes and goes. And you get into elevator 3, and it takes you to your floor. When you get inside the elevator, there are no controls. Well, actually, there are 2. It's open door and shut door. But it takes you to your floor. Because, look, you all know 6 people want to get into, you have 6 elevators, and there are 6 people, and they all get into the next elevator, your elevator, and each one goes to a different floor. And if you're at the top floor, you have to wait for all those stops. And what destination control is, it says, well, if you all want to go in different floors, I'll give you different elevators. And if 6 of you want to go to the same floor, I'll put you all in the same elevator. So it's a lot more efficient and it's faster. So you can either get things done faster or you can build a building with less elevators. But it's really frustrating for people. I was at a conference in Washington where they had one of these. And my wife and I were having dinner, and we looked over in the corner, and there was a person we knew. We went over and asked if we could sit down and have dinner with him, and he said, okay. And we had dinner, and he started complaining about these elevators. Whoever designed it, whoever thought of it, what's the matter with this decent, with the old way? You can't control it. Well, designers are supposed to understand this stuff. That guy's name was David Kelly. So I finally had to explain it to him. And he said, oh, yeah, well, maybe it does make sense. But it's really hard for people to change their ways. For those of you who didn't get the joke, David Kelly, well, he's the guy who started IDEO. He's the guy who started the D School. He's the guy whose name I misspelled in my book. I just discovered that this morning. One of my good friends emailed me, said, did you know you misspelled David Kelly's name? There's another one about perspectives, too. So I'm giving a talk. Remember which is correct, moving the cursor key up or down, and the answer is they're both correct. So suppose I'm giving a talk, and I want to show the next slide. And I have a slide projector that has 2 buttons, left and right. Which one do I push? And the smart ones among you will say, well, it depends what language group you come from, right? Yeah. Arabic and Hebrew, you're going to push the left button, and Roman languages, you'll push the right, etc. Okay, I have 2 buttons, top and bottom. Which one do I push? How many people think I should push the top button to get the next slide? How many people think I should push the bottom button to get the next slide? How many people can't believe that the answer you gave, somebody else might believe the opposite? Well, this happened to me. I was giving a talk, and I wanted the next slide, and I pushed the top, and the thing went backwards, and I said, what? And I said, this is badly designed, because everybody knows the top button means forward. It's true, actually, because it's a good mapping. If I just do that, that top button becomes a forward button. No, and I still believe that's true. So listen to the story. I'm not going to change that. So anyway, I asked the audience. I was going to point out what a bad design, so I asked the audience the same question I asked you. To my surprise, it was half and half, kind of. And this was in Asia, so I said, oh, it must be an Asian thing. But as I went around the world, I kept asking, and well, it's kind of like salt shakers. This has one hole, and this has 3. How many think the 1 hole is salt? How many think the 3 hole is salt? How many can't believe somebody would think the other? Why do you think the 1 hole is salt? Oh, because, what? I use less salt than pepper. Why do you think the 3 hole is salt? Oh, because I use less pepper than salt. And I keep saying, it doesn't matter what you think. What matters is what the person who filled it thinks. So what do you do in a restaurant? You pour it out to see. Anyway, when I say that the top button means forward, everybody agrees with me. The question is, what is moving forward? So here are the slides stacked up, and here I am. And I think that I move to the next slide and the next slide. So I push going forward to get the next slide. But suppose you think that it's the slides that move to you. So I push the bottom button and this next slide comes to me. The bottom button, the next slide comes to me. Which is right, which is wrong? They both are right, right? Just depends upon your point of view. So how do you design, what kind of design principles do we have here? I actually started to write about how this is a cultural convention, but it's not. It's a funny kind of culture because every place I go, people are split in what they believe. So it doesn't really quite fit the culture, although it turns out there really are cultural differences like that. So if I give you a bunch of photographs taken over a period of time and ask you to lay them out in time, you might lay them out vertically or left to right. But in some places, you'll lay them out from east to west, where the sun goes. And makes perfectly good sense. So there are these interesting cultural differences.
I'm sorry, would you explain that? Why is east to west interesting?
The question is, well, why is east to west laying it out interesting? Because people do it. Because it means if I lay it out here, and I have no idea which way is east, that way. That way? Okay. And if I'm sitting here, I'll put the oldest picture here and the newest picture there, to my left and right. But if I'm sitting this way, I'll do it vertically. Here I'm doing it horizontally, and here I'm going to do it vertically. And now I'm going to do it right to left. And that's just strange to most of us who think that time is a timeline that goes either left to right or up to down to up. That's why. One of my old Apple buddies who doesn't come up. The last section of my book is about design thinking. Now, I used to argue that design thinking was stupid. I mean, not stupid, it's intelligent, but that the phrase was stupid because the whole point was designers are more different than the rest of us, and we come out with these brilliant new insights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and no one else can do it because we're designers. But no, come on. Brilliant writers and artists and musicians and engineers and scientists have done this all the time. They are able to step outside the normal boundaries and do things that really are different and unique. So what's special about design thinking? And I've now changed my mind. And the reason is for several reasons. One is political or public relations, if you will. And the other is maybe there is something special. And public relations, first of all, what does a designer do? It is still hard to convince people that designers don't just make something look pretty. Many of you have already encountered that in your companies. And I'm a big supporter of design, says the CEO. But the CEO still thinks of it as making it look pretty. Whereas what we want to do is, redesign your organizational structure, or redesign the mail system, or redesign the medical system, or the transportation system of Singapore. And so it's different. And so calling ourselves design thinkers helps break away from the fact that we just make things look pretty. Second, in the newer design schools, not the old ones so much, we actually teach new ways of thinking. We try to teach creative ways and try to teach that, and that isn't true in any of the other fields, really. It's true in art and architecture, but not in engineering or science. There, we assume that people are brilliant, thinkers without bothering to question or teach. And there's one other aspect, which is the human-centered aspect, is that we are designing things for people, which means we really have to understand people and the way they interact with our technology. And the engineering point of view kind of is, if it wasn't for all those people, our stuff would really work well. If you look at the problems the new health system is having in getting its system up, it's not a technical problem of programming. It's the difficult problem of organizing across many disparate divisions and different organizations that have different standards and different rules and different ways of dealing with their data. If you want to log in, why is login so difficult? Because gee, it should be really simple. But no, because they want to check to see who you are. And it turns out the information about you is scattered in about 25 different databases in different kinds of companies or divisions or parts of the government that have different rules and different structures. It's a nightmare. And all large programs, all large projects are nightmares anyway. I don't care if it's a construction project or a programming project. So design thinking is actually, I think, something critical. So what is the human-centered design process? Well, there are two ways of describing it. The way that a lot of my designers friends describe it is, well, we start here, we end here, and the path is this. Now, engineers never understand this. I used to teach an MBA course at Northwestern. I had 10% of Kellogg students in my program. We would have a special program where you got an MBA from Kellogg, and you also got an engineering degree where the focus was design. And I would give these people problems on day one. And a lot of them were engineers by training, but they were in MBA school. And you give them a problem on day one, and you have them report back the next week, and they come back with fantastic solutions. And the engineers would have all the engineering diagrams, and the MBAs would add to that all the spreadsheets showing the increased sales and increased profits and margins and all that. And I would always say, that's wonderful, but how did you know you solved the right problem? You know, when you're in a programming team, you're doing a software project, the programmers want to start coding on day one, don't they? And you want to say, well, wait a minute, what is we trying to design? No, they want to start programming on day one. Engineers and MBAs are fantastic at solving problems. They don't stop and ask if it's the right problem, and we do. So that's what all this squiggle is about. And the British Design Council actually described it better as a double diamond, they call it. And what they say is what happens, you give you the problem, and you say, well, what's really the right problem? And you start diverging and studying. And so instead of taking, here's where we start, and we're going to come down to an answer, they say you start here and you start examining a million different things. And then you converge again and say, I got the right problem. And then, okay, now we have the right problem. Now let's find the right solution. And we don't go to the solution. We start looking at 1,000 different possible solutions, and then we finally hone in, given the constraints. So the double diamond. But you know how this works in industry. So first of all, there's Norman's law. The day the product team is assembled, it's over its budget and behind schedule.
They got t-shirts.
They even have t-shirts to say that, right? And so the team is assembled to do this new project, and you say, wonderful, the designer's going to go off, and we're going to do some really great design research, and this is going to be used around the world. We're going to send the team off to Bangladesh and to Bangalore and to Bangkok and to British Columbia and to wherever. And, you know, Berlin, whatever the B's are. And we're going to see what people really do, what they really need. And the project manager, suppose he's a good project manager and really understands, will say, yes, that's a really good idea. That's well, we should do it. But we're behind schedule. And besides, we don't have the money to do that now, so we can't do it. We'll do it next time. And of course, you hear the same story next time. So how much time do you need? Oh, 6 months. Come on. 2 months. Come on. And you get down to 1 month. So anyway, you get a 1 month to come up with an answer. And they don't understand it because what they say is, look, you just want you give us the requirements and then design to it. And they don't understand that the hardest part of design is figuring out the requirements. So you go, anyway, your project manager goes away and comes back a week later to see the progress you've made, and there's no progress. You're all over the place. Well, what are you doing? We're trying to figure out what the problem is. I told you the problem. So he goes away again, comes back in a week, and where's the progress? They haven't done anything. Oh, we figured out the problem. But I gave you the problem 2 weeks ago. And then you come back on the third week, and where are you? You're all over the place. What's the solution? I don't know. It's one of those. And as you all know, magic happens and it comes together at the last day. And somehow or other it does. And I've done this all the time. I never believe it's going to work this time. This time is going to be a disaster. And somehow it always comes together. And the same thing happens when I teach project courses in classes, where the students develop their own projects. It looks like halfway through the course they don't know what they're doing, and this is doing a disaster. And 3/4 of the way through the course, this is, oh God, you know, it's always worked before, but this year it's not going to happen. And it always comes together at the end. And I think because all this exploration, which looks like it's going nowhere, is actually really setting the stage so you really deeply understand what the issues are, which is what allows you to converge so quickly. Okay, there's one more thing I want to say about designers, which I think is important. Actually, there are 2 more points before I finish, which is designers don't know much. So I'm talking about HCI is a different field. HCI, the traditional HCI, actually there are two kinds of HCI people or UX people. One comes from the human-computer interaction, psychology, computer science background. The other comes from classical design background, industrial design, or what is now starting to be called interaction design. And they're very different. If you get a degree from a design school, which traditionally has been in design and art and architecture departments or schools, you are a craftsman. You learn craftsmanship. You'll spend 4 years developing the craft. You don't learn anything else besides the craft. You don't learn anything about the world. You don't learn anything about other fields. You learn how to draw. You'll spend a lot of time learning to draw straight lines. And then you can learn how to draw ovals. And then you can graduate to rectangles. And then after 1- and 2-dimensional drawing, you can graduate to 3-dimensional. And then you start learning about materials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where the superb stuff is that we get. That's beautiful and wonderful and nice to feel. But nowadays, these designers who are traditionally trained like this are asked to design a new health system, or a transportation system, or complex systems of all sorts for which they have no background or no knowledge. And some of them do brilliantly. And so one thing that great designers are fast learners. And so one thing that's really fun if you work in a design consultancy is how today you're going to be working on a new, I don't know, app for a phone, and tomorrow a new banking application, and the next day on a new health system, and the next day on a transportation system, and who knows what. And you have to learn these things quickly. And when you learn things, when you go and you try to figure out what's going on and you don't have any clues to the field, you ask stupid questions. And the most powerful question is a stupid question. Because what is a stupid question? It's one that everybody says, oh God, that's obvious. Well, if you push and say, okay, why is it obvious? That's what we've always done. Well, why is that? And it's amazing how many times people have no idea why that's the way it's done. And when you start questioning these kind of fundamentals, that's where you start to get the breakthroughs. You say, well, maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Now, asking stupid questions is really important. Now, there's one last thing I need to talk to you about. Those of you who are in UX, who is your customer? The whole point of human-centered design is understand your customers and design for the people who use these products. So who is your customer? Designers come to me, and HCI people and UX people come to me and say, how do I convince my management to take me more seriously, to get me involved in the beginning, or help decide what the product ought to be in the first place? Don't call me in too late. Well, what do you do now? Well, I go and tell them what wonderful work we do and how it really makes the customers happy and they really like it. And management says, oh, okay. But that's not how you convince management. Because management's feeling, if you tell them you're really doing great work, they say, well, that's why we hired you, right? That doesn't help you. Who is your customer? You study the people who use your product. But that isn't who uses you. The person who uses you is your boss, or more accurately, the boss of your boss, or perhaps your boss's boss's boss. And if you're working at a consultancy, your customer is the person who hired you. And so one of the things you ought to say when you're working for somebody is my goal in a consultancy is to get my client, the person I work with, get that person promoted. And when I talk to the management, I have to understand the way they think, just like I have to understand the way the person who uses a cell phone thinks, or a medical device, or a diabetes patient who has to inject themselves all the time. Well, how do they think? How do I have empathy with my boss, or more importantly, your boss? Probably that's easy. It's your boss's boss or their boss. What do they get promoted on or rewarded on? Great products? Well, sure. But no, they really get promoted and rewarded on profitability. Increased margins, increased profits, decreased costs. So why don't we talk the language to them? Marketing does it. Marketing comes in and says, we've got to add these 5 features, and if you add these 5 features, here's the spreadsheet. And we go in and say, oh, look, we can make it easier to understand. But there's no spreadsheet. And when I talk to designers about this and say, why don't you do that? They say, how can you tell what the increased sales will be if I make it easier to understand? And I say, how can you tell what the increased sales will be if I add 3 new features? You lie. Now, it's not quite a lie, because it has to, look, the executives are not stupid. You may think executives are stupid, but they really aren't. I was once one, and there are a few others in here, and they know that you make up the numbers. So they have to be plausible, because it's still the best guess. And what they really have to do is say, how good is this going to be for the company? Look, when I was at Apple, we made great products, and nobody was buying them. We were losing money. We had Bill Gates come down once to talk to the executive team, and Bill said, he said, I make more money off each Apple computer sold than you do. He sold all of his products. And we had real trouble selling and making profits. And so if you're not making money, it doesn't matter how good your product is. And that's why they, another thing designers say, well, those marketing people or those engineers who get into management, well, they went and got an MBA. Yeah? So why don't more of us go and get MBAs? Not everybody. But in fact, if you really want to succeed in a company, you have to understand what's important for the company. So that's kind of the message of the Design of Everyday Things version 2, which is things have changed, the examples are different, technology is different, the principles are the same. But we now, in the world of business, emotional products do win, but you have to understand the constraints of business, which is, and it's got to make money, which is there's the installed base. You can't really deviate from the installed base, or otherwise you'll introduce the destination control elevator and nobody will want to use it. Ooh, I go inside and there's no controls. What if I change my mind about what floor I'm going to? And so we really do have to understand the principles. We still have to do human-centered design. We do have to understand people and their real needs. We should work better with engineering, by the way, and work better with marketing. So we have to, because otherwise we design things and engineering ruins it, and then marketing ruins it. And it's not because they're stupid, it's because we didn't work with them and know what their real requirements were. If we were with a team, we wouldn't ruin it. We all, oh, I see. Maybe we can compromise, or maybe we did it this way, we'd both be happy. Remember that when you fight with marketing, we're on the same side, but we want to understand what people really need. And they want to understand what people really buy. And those are different things. And both are necessary. I was just in a hotel in Boston last week, and we had a Sony radio on the side. And it had a button that basically said, better sound. So why would you do that? It's kind of stupid, right? Because how else would the person know it was better sound? This way they can push the button and see and turn it off. Oh, it isn't such good sound. Push it again and better sound. Well, that's what marketing knows how to do. They know how to add a few extra things that increase the enjoyment. And that's my message to you. Thank you.
Don't all raise them at once.
I'm interested in how you might extend thinking from a
Could you
business...
raise your hand? I need to see where you are. There you are, on the floor.
of how you might extend thoughts from a business and physical product perspective to things that have more complicated evaluation criteria, such as getting relief into a typhoon area, or redesigning the Singapore transportation system, or healthcare systems, where you have a very complicated mix of objectives.
So products can be really hard because products live in an infrastructure, and the successful product isn't a lone product, but it has to fit into the system. But these other problems are really challenging. And I like that. I mean, I wouldn't like the field if it was easy. So it is really hard. And because when you do a political system, when you do a health system or a transportation system, it's a political problem. And politics isn't necessarily bad. I consider politics the art of getting along when different people have different perspectives and points of view, and they contradict each other. And how do you navigate? There's also other problems, but that's the good side of it, and it's difficult. And the reason that IDEO likes to say we're helping to redesign the transportation system in Singapore, or the health system, is of all the countries of the world, Singapore is perhaps the easiest to work with, because it's a country that's a city, and moreover run very strongly and strictly by highly educated engineers and bureaucrats, because it's hard otherwise. And in this country, well, the problems I've said I would not work on in this country are education and health. And education's a mess because everybody knows how people should be educated, because we were educated ourselves. And every single state wants control, and every single locality wants control, and it's a real mess. And so where am I working today? I'm working in education, and I'm working in health, because they're important problems, but they are really difficult. They are really difficult. And you have to get all the people together. I'm working on a big project with the University of Texas at Houston Medical Center, which is one of the biggest medical centers in the country. And it's a huge project from NIH to do electronic medical records and to set some of the standards. And we have about 8 different universities and about 6 different companies. We have the major vendors of electronic medical records as part of our advisory board. And trying to reach agreement is difficult. And this is a very cooperative group. And I think we are making progress, but it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a lot of work. So there's no easy answer. No easy answer. It's really hard. And the worst part, some of you may have experienced, you see this in companies, when you finally got through the politics of your company and they're all in favor of what you're doing and they support you, and then the people change. And that happens in governments all the time.
A question, all of the mobile operating systems are moving away from perceived affordances for their controls, in part because almost everything is a touch surface, so if you add perceived affordances, it becomes very visually complex. Do you think this is generally a bad trend, or is it okay because people have now learned? Well,
actually, so you talk about we're moving away from perceived affordances, which is a quick reminder. I hate the word affordance. When you're talking about digital stuff, people say, oh, I put a circle there as in affordance so people know where to push. No, you didn't. You put a signal. You tell them that you're signifying where you should push, so I'm after signifiers, but that's a different talk. We are moving away from nice buttons and physical things. First of all, it went to screens, but there was the traditional graphic user interface was pretty well defined. Today it's gestures, which can be any place, but it's moving away from gestures on screens to gestures in space. And we're talking about whole body motion or results that are a function of where you are in the location or how fast you're walking or what you're doing. And that's going to cause lots of problems. And you ask if it's better or worse, and the answer is yes. These things are exciting. They're fun. You can do things you couldn't do before. And they are fun and entertaining. And they're easier for lots of people to pick up and get to use. But they also, when you're doing complex work, I mean, how many of you do spreadsheets on your iPad? I mean, spreadsheets for work. It's just not the right vehicle. And so we're going to have to figure out what things work well and what don't. And the gesture systems are going to go through some hell, in part because everyone's going to try their own gestures, in part because they're going to patent the gestures, so even if you think that's a good one, you're not allowed to use it. And it's going to be a while before we get some standards. So I think it's both exciting, and there are huge opportunities and huge problems ahead.
Yes, sir.
You had promised to say something about signifiers?
I just said something about signifiers.
No, something else earlier.
I really think the most important thing for a designer is the signal. So what a designer has to do, I design something. I don't care if it's a transportation system or a health system or a new dishwasher. I have to explain to you how to use it through the design itself, because I'm not there when you use it. And you're not going to read a manual. So it has to be in the, and so this means good feedback, good conceptual model, and signifiers that help signify what I do and what's happening. And I think it's not the affordances. The affordances have to be there. And for physical devices, they have to afford the right behavior. But I've always thought the important part for designers was the physical affordance that you could see, the visible affordance. And that's really a signifier. That's signaling what to do or where to do it. A doorknob signals, this is where I grasp, but it actually doesn't tell you whether I push or pull or rotate or what. But so it's a partial signifier. And I think it's signifiers that are much more important. And in many ways, if you simply erase affordance from your vocabulary and use signifiers, I'd be happier. I think it would also change your point of view, because the word itself, which is taken from semiotics, helps spell out what it's about. It's signifying what action to do or where to do it.
Hey, sir. I worked for 4 years at Intel, and during this period, I've been, I don't know, listening a lot about user interfaces and how things could be easier for people to do, and that's in another way, it's how people have to adapt the minimal as possible to machines. When we start looking things such as Google and Facebook, that they see the patterns of how you do, what do you do, and they start adapting to you, do you see, like, looking very in a long future, design using intelligence to adapt to different cultures? So the design in a hardware system or I don't know, in a function itself could adapt if I have a different mindset that a person in the other side, it's more like a, the question would be, have, actually okay. Yeah, I don't want a simple yes or no. It's how would you foresee, or how would you see that happening?
I'll give you an answer. I'll give you the answer I want to give, right? And
that would be great.
you can decide if it has to do with the question. I've actually spent a lot of time in the last couple of days on an issue that's closely related. I'm on a National Academies of Science committee to look at the way that humans should interact with machines and with automatic machines. In fact, it's one of the sponsors is the military, the Department of Army's intelligence service, and more of our devices have autonomy. So cars can pretty much drive themselves now, airplanes can fly themselves, and lots of decisions can be made by themselves. And there's a lot of talk about machines ought to adapt to us and modify themselves to understand us, but the reality is that's not the way it's going to happen. Because engineers automate what they can automate, and they put in the intelligence that they know how to put in. They measure what they can measure, and the stuff they can't measure couldn't be important, could it? And so we're getting more and more of the control is taken away from us, and in a way that's bad. Now, people have always adapted to the technology. The technology only slightly is adapted to people. That's because, if people really can't use it, then the technology dies. But otherwise, look at this auditorium, the way you're seated. It's because of the technology of one person addressing a large number and a big screen, because most people use slides. I don't like them because they trap me. But the Google cars have this weird law, right? Because the only way they got permission to use them in California and Nevada was, oh, there's always a person in control, right? So there has to always be a person sitting there in the driver's seat, so if anything goes wrong, they can take over. That's absolute nonsense. And it's going to be absolute nonsense in the military, too. You're in an airplane, a fighter jet, and it makes a tight turn, the pilot's unconscious. Because the G-forces make the pilot unconscious. So the plane has to make its own decisions. And if you're driving in a car and something goes wrong, how much time do you have to react? You're dozing, you're not paying much attention, the car's been driving for 6 months with no problems ever. And now something goes wrong and you have a half second to react, forget it. In airplanes this happens, by the way. The plane is flying along and no one's paying attention and suddenly it starts diving to Earth. But these are well-trained pilots and they have, you're 6 miles up. You have 2 or 3 minutes to respond. And in all the cases I've looked at, they always recover. And not in automobiles. So I think that actually we're going to adapt to the technology. We adapt our rooms, we adapt them for the electric outlets, for the way the water has to flow. Our automobiles are, look, why are automobiles and computers and telephones the same all around the world? Shouldn't they be different for different cultures? Even the typewriter, the QWERTY keyboard is the same all around the world with minor variations, right? AZERTY in France, but we adapt to the technology. And I'm not saying that's correct, I'm saying that's the way it is. And we're trying in this report to say, it's a time we stop saying this is what people are good at and this is what machines are good at and let's make the machines do what they're good at and to allow the people to do what they're good at. The reason we have human error is because we are asked to control the machines in the way the machines require it. And that's stuff that we're bad at. High precision, good repetition. But we want to make them teammates. So our argument is we want to think of it as a collaboration where we're each doing our part in this complex task we're doing. It's a very different mindset. And I think that's the way we should go, as collaboration. It's not who adapts to whom.
Hi, Don. Thanks for taking my question. It's about emotion. You mentioned the example of the iPhone not being as easy to discover and not being as easy to change time zone, and yet people love it. And so there's this emotional aspect where other devices or other operating systems may offer the discoverability aspect, but people don't seem to love or enjoy using those devices as much. So why?
You don't enjoy Emacs or Unix? Because I think it speaks to a human. I think gestures are fun, and they're actually much more human than typing a command or pulling down a menu and reading and selecting. And they're not badly designed. We pick these things up and we can usually get our tasks done pretty well. And many people never bother to read up on it, but they just experiment and they get their stuff done. I think we could do better, but they are fun. And the motion, one thing that's been absent from design is understanding time. And for even emotional design, when I talk about emotional design, most people think is, oh, I want to build this thing that's just emotionally wonderful. But it's as if it's a static state of wonderfulness. But if you study theater, for example, or playwriting, or movie writing, or TV writing, you know that if you want people to really enjoy something, they have to go through some pain. The best excitement comes from release from the tension and from the difficulties. And all playwrights do that, right? The hero fails. Because you're not going to have this great success at the end unless there's some failures along the middle. So we have to do that too. And I think the way we're starting to use motion and the way that things jiggle, and I don't know who invented viscous motion and momentum, on scrolling lists, but that was brilliant. Because the normal way you'd say, well, if I want to move the list up, I move it, and take my finger off, it stops. But instead, we gave it momentum. So it doesn't keep going, it slows down. It has some viscous stuff, and moreover, when it hits the edge, it bounces. So those are just emotionally pleasing. They serve no functional reason, but we like them. And so I think that overcomes a lot. So it's neat.
Thank you.
Hi, I have an adaptation problem that I'd like your help with. I've only been in the field about 30 years, so it still is always an amazement to me, but I used to have a dumb phone, and while I was driving, I could feel for the button of my speed dials and call people. Now I have a smartphone. Not only can I not use my speed numbers, I can't get the damn, screen to even activate without having an accident. So that tactile information.
It's trying to tell you something. Don't use your phone while driving. Let me just say, there's a real message there that there's no question that for lots of tasks, hard buttons are the correct thing. Because if I want to adjust the volume of my radio or the temperature, I don't have to look. I could just reach out and I can tell by feel where it is, and I turn the knob and I know which way it's going. And that's clearly superior. But the problem really is that we are doing too much in the car. The car is not... I'm always amazed. We have people who can barely walk across the stage, who could not catch a ball if you threw it at them, completely uncoordinated, driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour on a fairly narrow road. What's going on here? And so driving is unfortunately too easy. It takes a couple of years to learn, right? You have to go to courses, and the first year you're not very good, but after it becomes automatic, most of the time it's really easy. But when things happen, things go wrong, it happens fast. And it's attention that's the critical thing. And if your attention is on the phone conversation you're having, I don't care if it's hands-free or not, it's dangerous. We have heads-up displays. I have one in my car, which sounds good because I'm looking out in front and it tells me my speed limit and how fast I'm going and navigation instructions. But tell you, when I'm looking at the heads-up display, I don't see the objects that are right there, right behind it. That's been shown in study after study in aviation. Attention is what's limiting. So not being able to use your phone is a good thing, and use that as an excuse. Don't use the phone while you drive.
As a follow-up question, though, I mean, there is the loss of the physical buttons, and that affects us in other contexts, not just when we're driving. So
I'm a fan of physical buttons. But you have to remember what happened in aviation and also in cars, and we'll start with the BMW. The BMW people said, we have so many buttons and knobs on this dashboard, they don't fit anymore, and it's crazy, so let's get rid of them. The problem is real. It's nice if you have 3 buttons, you can go reach them and feel them, but not when you have 20. And so the problem was real. Now their solution was wrong. The iDrive, with no buttons, just one little thing and a screen, while driving at 120 kilometers an hour down the road, right? But so yeah, physical buttons have their place, but too many physical buttons are a problem.
Okay, question. Can you tell us what you think of Siri and of speech interaction as a primary or a supplemental interaction method?
Well, of course, my good friend did Siri, and so I have to say nice things. I think it was... Siri, I think, was in many ways a good breakthrough. The previous one that I really liked was Tell Me, which was a voice recognition system which worked really well, not because it did better at understanding voice, but it did better understanding the tasks people did. And so therefore, with partial voice recognition and knowing the sort of things people wanted to do, it was able to do a really good job. And when it couldn't understand, it did a really nice job of saying, oh, I didn't understand, as opposed to error 37. And Siri is in a similar thing. It has much more intelligence. And it actually does look up things and does start to understand, but it's very limited. technically. But I thought they did a brilliant job of taking the limited speech understanding they could do and giving you appropriate results. And today there's a bunch of competitors. If you look at Google's, what is it now, it's, as far as I can tell, it's equally good. It's not as much fun. Siri really mined the emotional component and the humor, and Google is not. But it's still rather nice, and I'm using speech more and more. And it's really nice if I could go on my computer, I say, what's the population of New York? And I say it out loud, and it speaks it back. The population of New York is blah. That's nice, but speech is only going to be supplemental, because if you wanted to take notes at this lecture and you only could use speech, right? Your neighbors might not appreciate that. So speech cannot be used in many social circumstances. Then again, while driving the car, speech is probably superior because it doesn't use the hands and the eyes. So I think speech will get better and better. Those people in this audience who try to understand language deeply are kind of annoyed because the new systems are all statistical and they don't really have any great understanding. And I personally think that the correct solution is a combination. I suspect that's how the human works. Our neural networks are statistical, but we also have some deep understanding about what the meaning is. And we have a huge amount of context we bring to bear, and the systems, today's systems don't do that well. So they will get better and better, but it will always be the case that speech is limited. We can't instruct other people using speech in certain circumstances, like when others are listening.
Hi, Don. Oh, okay. I have to project. So the first time I read your first book, I couldn't help but think to myself, I wonder how many times a day this man says to himself, who the hell designed this thing? How many times a day do you look at different things that you're just appalled at the way it's designed? And what is the last thing that you saw that you were just amazed at the way it was designed? Like you just stopped and you, in awe, looked at that and said, wow, who designed this thing?
I've actually tried to have much more sympathy. And I have a rule, which is don't criticize unless you can do better. And also try to understand why it happened the way it was. And so a lot of times there isn't that much choice, or a lot of times the engineers didn't think through, but a lot of the times it's because complex systems are designed by many, many different people. And the reason lighting is so bad in most rooms and auditoriums is because different people design the different components. And usually the electricians are called in at the end to put in the switches, and they just put them in. They don't know how it's going to be used. So who do we blame for the bad design? Well, I blame the lack of coordination, which is actually the biggest culprit in many of these problems. It has to do with a lack of coordination among all the different groups, each of whom would like to do a good job. So let me answer the opposite of your question. I spent all day at Udacity today trying to finish this course I'm doing. And they got new food, whatever you call them. Vending machines. Heavens, come on, this is Silicon Valley. Who pays for this stuff? They used to have 2 refrigerators, which I loved because one of them had the bad conceptual model that I talk about in my book, and the other one had the good conceptual model that I talk about in the book, right side by side. It's wonderful. I put that in the course, by the way. But there was this one, they have these big things for Coke and drinks and milk and all the stuff you want with big glass doors. And I noticed that one of them it was a vertical thing for opening. And you put your hand there and there was a slot and your fingers felt in. And it was obvious this was a signal to pull. And the one right next to it, there was the same vertical thing, but you couldn't put your fingers in. And oh, this one slides. I actually spent 5 minutes there playing with it back and forth. When people came by and said, what are you doing? Because I thought it was really, for the first time, there were 2 that seemed, for sliding or pulling, they were unambiguous. That was just nicely done.
So I have right here. I have a question about safety. So a conversation that you had just a couple minutes ago about You know, hey, I like to mess with my phone while I'm driving. Oh, I can't feel the buttons. So you would think the response would be, I'm not going to use the phone, but the actual response often is, well, I'm just going to look at the road less. And so, you know, you also mentioned, which I think is true, a lot of people don't read user manuals. So how is it that you communicate these things that have unsafe solutions? How do you get the word out if, you know, if you use the product this way, something really bad could happen, but it's not intuitive and your solution might make it worse? How is it that you would approach that?
It's not intuitive because everybody is an above average driver. And I know other people have trouble, but I can multitask. There are three ways I know of. One of them is education, which actually surprisingly can work. So that seatbelt usage is mostly through education. Another one is technology trying to block it so that your phone doesn't work if it detects that it's moving. And the problem is here we measure what we can measure and the rest. So you can measure that the phone is moving. That's not hard. But is it the driver or the passenger? That's harder. And so a lot of the technology says you can't set your navigation system while traveling. Well, what if the passenger wants to adjust it and so on? And that's difficult. The other way is to use automation. And I think that's what's going to happen to automobile driving. We used to kill 50,000 people a year, but because of increased safety stuff on cars, anti-skid brakes and stability control and better seatbelt usage, we now kill 43,000 or so. It's going down despite increases in number of drivers. And also the campaign against drunk driving has helped. So that's education, because the most deaths are caused by drunk drivers, and that's gone way down. But I think fully automated cars are going to be the way to go. Now, that's really hard. Not because the technology is hard. We're getting close to it. And every single automobile manufacturer now has automatic cars. Nissan just announced that in 20 years they'll be selling fully automatic cars. And BMW has them, and Ford has them, and Mercedes-Benz has them. And in fact, most cars have autonomous cruise control, which means they keep a safe distance with the car in front. If a car comes in front of you, your car will slow to keep a safe distance measured in time, not in feet. It will brake if it has to, stop if it has to, and lane keeping control. But no car does full lane keeping control and autonomous cruise control, because then you wouldn't pay attention. It's not because the technology can't do it. And I think, though, the problems are social and organizational. That first of all, they're not 100% reliable. But second, think of this. What happens when only some of the cars can drive themselves and the others can't? Or what happens when they all can drive themselves, but, well, in my household, I have a 1996 car and a 2013 car, right? So that's 17 years apart. And on the road, the many cars are 20 years apart in age. And even if they're all automatic and all can communicate with each other, a 20-year gap in technology is a huge difference. And so trying to negotiate how we should do this when we have to sort of accommodate the weakest technology is going to be difficult. And I also think there's going to be a real political upheaval, that automatic cars will be driving, the death rate will go way down, and then there's an accident which will involve 50 automobiles all at once, because they're all platooning and all this, and I don't know, 50 people will die in that one accident, and everyone will be in an uproar. And they'll forget that we used to kill 40,000 people a year. Now we're killing 100 people a year. Maybe only 2 accidents. But it's going to be a big political issue. So it's actually, I think, the prediction that by 2020 we'll have automatic driving is not going to happen. We will have it in some circumstances. Maybe mining trucks will do it. Maybe trucks in restricted areas will do it. Well, we already have automatic trains with no drivers. And they're on rails, that helps, and et cetera. But that, I think, is, in the end, the ultimate solution. Because people really want to talk on their cell phones. They really do.
Hi, this is Jeremiah Still from San Jose State University. And I was wondering, what isn't a signifier? Could you give me some examples of what aren't signifiers? Because this is something that I kind of struggle with theoretically.
Well, you could probably interpret almost any object to have a meaning. But I'm talking about something that is put in deliberately by people to indicate an appropriate use. Now, not only that, I mean, I wrote a book called Living with Complexity where I argue there are social signifiers like, you know, you read the book, but I have to tell the other people. I rushed to the train station in Evanston to go to Chicago, and oops, did I miss the train or not? And if there's nobody on the platform, I probably missed it, and there are lots. Those are signifiers. And the way the flag blows can be an accidental signifier, but just, you know, a patriotic flag. But if it's at the airport, it's a deliberate signifier, same kind of signal. So you're right, probably everything can be a signifier. I mean, that signifies the desperate attempt by Park to make itself relevant. And
Hi, my name is Garima. We were talking about how the technology has changed from past to today, where there were a lot of buttons to no buttons or one button in the device. And in the future, where we are looking forward to having more of gestures, how the affordance or signifiers will also change, because as you said, how do you know you have to swipe, or how do you know if you double tap on the YouTube, it's going to be full screen? And more such things will happen or may not happen. Do you have any insight as to what the future of such things will be?
I have a really good track record of predicting the future. Mostly wrong. But I don't think buttons are going away. I think they're coming back. I think we have more and more physical devices again. We're building more physical products because they have lots of virtues. If you take and play a game with Kinect, which can work completely by gestures, it doesn't feel right if you're playing a tennis game or a golf game. So what do? We get tennis rackets to play the game with. You can buy special tennis rackets just for playing Kinect, even though it's not really necessary. But the physical device makes a big difference when you're doing a physical sport. And there are lots of reasons why, even though we can do things that are just fully gesture or location, it's not the best way. And I see more and more products bringing back the knobs and the buttons, whether it's a toaster or a microwave oven or your automobile. And yeah, we're also experimenting with things that don't require anything, but it's not going to go very far. Actually, my wife and I just Netflixed Minority Report again because we wanted to watch to see, you know, what's happening with gestures. And those are pretty silly gestures. Now, they were actually done by a really good person. It comes out of the MIT Media Lab, and he now has a startup doing similar things. But in the movie, it's not obvious what on earth the benefits were. And it's kind of bizarre that when they want to transfer the information from here, the way it's been done in the research labs for a long time is, yeah, this is my computer system and that's yours, but I can still swipe it, and it obviously means it shows up on this screen. But no, there they have this wonderful plastic thing where they put the information on and they pull it out of the slot and they walk over here and they push it in. So they're still using physical things, and in part it makes the movie better. You can see the person moving it, but there's a good reason for physical things. By the way, they even have this marble when the information comes in this marble that rolls down these chutes, which is a wonderful answering machine that was done by this RCA student at Apple. What was his name? Daryl. That's close. What is it? Daryl Bishop. And I think that was copied from there, by the way. It was not an accident. Very physical.
The teapot image on the cover of the book does a very good job of epitomizing the message of the book. Could you talk about the origin of that image? Who designed it? Was that your idea? Did that come from someone else?
I discovered this wonderful book called, actually I can't remember the name of the book, but it was a French artist called, what's his name? Catalog of Unfindable Objects, or what's the artist's name? Karelman, Jacques Karelman. My editor just spotted me, yes, said Jack Karelman. He died, unfortunately. But he had this wonderful books, and I was at a conference in Paris, and I went to all the bookstores and bought every single copy I could find of the several different books he did. And he had lots of wonderful drawings like that. And I used a number of the drawings in the first edition. And in this edition, I tried to use nothing that was owned by anybody else. I'm sick and tired of the permissions fights. It's not that I mind getting permission. It's not that I mind paying somebody for the rights to use their stuff. It is their stuff. They worked hard. It's that the rules and regulations drive me crazy. The New York Times, for example, I wanted to quote like a 35-word passage once, and they required a 50-word acknowledgement. And on top of that, when you get permission, it's for, 10,000 copies. And so you have to keep track of the copies. And for different languages, you have to do it again. And every single company is different. It's like the one thing you don't ever want to get is permission to use a snip from a movie. Because it's not that you should object. It's fine to pay and get permission, but it would be nice to have to go to one place. But you can't. Everybody, each actor, the directors, the producer, the owner of the movie, all have their own permissions. So Jacques Karelman gets all the credit. And what I did now was I had actually have a teapot that was made for me, an impossible teapot. So instead of using his, I just photographed mine. Because he was so hard to reach. It was really hard. And other people have asked me how to get permission from him, and I don't know. Well, he died, I discovered, so that doesn't help.
That's me again. Design puts humor, the human as the center of the entire experience, but the human itself is inside of a larger context. We are affected by kind of a fauna, flora, by nature, by other animals, by a broader thing. And when you look in huge disasters such as the Philippines, where I don't know, a hurricane just did a huge mess, how do you think that design could contribute to also make our existence here as humans more friendly with the entire resources and the universe?
A lot of the design community is actually worried about that. Do we have a responsibility to for the betterment of humankind, to be environmentally more friendly, and also to work in the disadvantaged communities, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer has to be yes. But I think the designers are giving themselves too much credit when they think that the designer alone can do this. These are very complex problems. And designers, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, often have very little power even in their own organization. And so I think we need to bring together a much larger set of groups. And that's happening. But all these difficult problems are, well, difficult. And they require many, many different disciplines to band together towards a solution. I don't have an easy answer for you. In fact, that's the problem. Too many people have easy answers. Too many design projects for students. They all love to go to Africa, and they spend a couple of weeks, and they come back having solved the water problem, or the irrigation problem, or the health problem. And no, they haven't. They may have done something that's very clever, but they didn't do it with the community, and it's not lasting. These are hard problems.
Hey, I'm Troy, and I was curious to get some more thoughts on the elevator story that you told with the destination control. And what I'm interested in is if you were to do a contextual inquiry in the way that people think and understand elevators, and then try to design a better elevator, you may not come up with that solution because it doesn't fit into their mental model per se. So that solution that you described sounds more like an engineering solution because the engineers know that's the most efficient route. But from a user-centered design perspective, that may not really fit into their mental model. So how would you reconcile, or do you have any further thoughts about, is that a good design, is that a bad design? Even though we know it's more efficient and it'll make their trip better, it doesn't really work for the way that they think.
It's a problem when anytime you introduce new technology or new methods of doing things that don't fit the way people do things. So that's why we've been unable to improve upon the typewriter, really. But if the destination control elevator had been introduced first, would we have trouble with it? Probably no different than automatic elevators in the first place. Remember, elevators used to have a person. You would just tell the person what floor. And when we got rid of the person, people did have trouble. So I think this is a change that isn't necessarily bad, but it goes against what we're used to. But what we're used to is accidental. And a lot of the technology is like that. And some of it's hard to know, is it good or bad? It really is hard to determine that. But much of the technology we have, people really rebelled against at first. Automatic transmissions, I would never use that in my car. I can shift better than the car can. Spark advance, why do I need that? I can do it better than the car can. Stability control, anti-skid braking. The professionals always yell against it. And people don't like it either. You hit the anti-skid brake and suddenly it vibrates. Ooh, it must be broken. You take your foot off the brake. Defeats the purpose. But that's the way it is with our complex world. If we only stuck with what we could do in the standard ways we do it, we never would do things better. Now, you're right, the destination control elevator is better mainly for the elevator companies or the apartment house or company. But that's actually not completely true. I like the fact that it gets me to my floor faster. I know that even if it tells me to go to this elevator and the other elevator comes and goes, that's because if I take this one, I'll get to my floor faster than had I taken that one. So to me, that's not bad.
Hello.
I'd like to, a lot of you are really patient sitting here, and you know, it's okay if you leave. I won't.
So just to go and follow up, sort of, you made mentions of gesture-based, for the Connect, and then, the voice with Siri improving. The most interesting thing, sort of, in the, living room situation that I've seen is, or I think that's kind of exciting, is the new Connect with the new Xbox with much more powerful hardware. I was sort of interested in how you feel, not for gaming, because I've not quite been convinced that it's really that much more fun to go and kind of wave without feedback, but for the ability to go and make, like, being in your home or, entertainment system or any other systems, to use these voice systems and these visual recognition systems to just make, these interfaces just sort of disappear so they don't get in the way of us, enjoying what we wanted to go and do. Is this like 25 years out, or have we already, covered that 25 years that we had with the touchscreen before this is going to go and,
I think we're in for a period of great experimentation. And I don't know how it's going to end up, but in the living room, which is a mess to control the entertainment system and the gaming system and the music system and the TV system. And it needs a change, but it's really hard to do because it's competing companies with proprietary systems that don't allow you to make a single unified control or make it difficult to do that. But yeah, I see that, look, Apple wants to rule the entertainment world and the living room with its computer systems and Apple TV, and Google would like to get in there if it could figure out how, and Microsoft has Xbox, and Sony has the PlayStation, and they all want to rule the living room. They don't just want to play games, they want to be the controller for everything. And in some sense that's good. The competition will cause, I think, interesting experimentation. I don't know which way it's going to go, but I always think that when these new companies come in with new ideas like that, or when these old companies come in with new ideas, it leads, in the short run, it leads to chaos. In the long run, it might be superior, but not in the short run. And this is true of every early technology, whether it's the automobile or the radio or the television. Remember when television sets had tint and color controls? You ever know what the difference was between tint and color? And so early days are really always a mess.
Hello? Hi.
Yeah, regarding your remarks about who is your customer and, you know, if you're not selling product, it doesn't matter, and why don't we, more of us get MBAs? Well, do you have any ideas about how we could measure our contribution so that we could show up with our spreadsheets like the marketers do? Is any research being done in that area?
Well, there's a huge amount of market research being done on how you estimate what the potential market is for modified products or new products.
No, this isn't market research. This is user research, like
Yes.
contextual inquiry, where you find out what's not known, as opposed marketing research talks about what's known.
No.
That's my understanding of it anyway.
I understand that. First of all, when you say design research and then you say contextual research, as if that's all there was. No, there are lots of ways of doing design research. But look, we like to think, and we train people, and we all want to do the great, wonderful innovations are going to change the world, that brings out something new that no one's ever seen before or experienced before. 99 or 98% of those things fail. And most of them are stupid ideas in the first place, and even the good ones fail or take decades before they come into being. I have a friend who that's his living, basically, to explain this point. And most innovation is incremental, which means we're making things better. In fact, the whole human-centered design approach is, it's designed by committee. It's a very intelligent, sensible committee, but what it is, it's hill climbing. It says, I'm going to design this, and now I'm going to see how it works, and if there are problems, I'm going to, oh, this is higher, and I'm going to move up to a slightly better position, and then I'm going to modify it and move up, and I get to the top of the hill. That's great. Except there may be a much bigger hill there. And the problem is, when I think of this great innovation, I've made film cameras better and better and better, and now somebody says, I'm going to make a camera that doesn't have film, which actually will be better. It did take over the world, except when it went to this new mountain, which is a much higher mountain, it went to the very bottom. And the problem is it's not nearly as good as the film cameras. And so it's really hard, because it's easy when I show you the hills, but you don't know what the landscape looks like. And so if you're in a company and you build this wonderful new product called the Newton, and it fails, does that mean you were too low on the hill, that it was really a high hill, or that it was a crappy hill, you should get away from it? And that's a hard problem. And there we don't know how to solve it. But most innovation is incremental, and there we do. You want to know what the market impact of fitting their true needs is, and that's where market research comes into being. Design research is all about trying to understand those needs, but it doesn't give you the kind of information to make business decisions. So you need both of those. It's not that one is better than the other, it's that they're answering different questions. But the brand new idea that will revolutionize the world, well, gee, I mean, I came to a lecture here, I forget how long ago, a month or 2 months ago, about the inventor of the Xerox machine, xerography. He went through 2 wives in 30 or 40 years, and it was a real mess. It took a long time. He used sulfur, which stunk, and he had a machine. It took him a long time before he could demonstrate that something would work, and nobody wanted it. He finally found, Haloid Company, and Battelle Research helped him bring it to fruition. But it took basically his whole life. And that's the way a lot of these innovations are.
So Nancy, it's 9:31, and we don't have a program chair to cut us off. So I have a question here. I know you have one there. How many more do you think? We have another one down here. So how about 3 more, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
we may have reached the limit, you know?
Right here, Don. Howdy. I'm course 6. I'm an engineer, but I love design. I work with designers. And so one question I have is like, how do you build small teams to work well? How do you empower designers to know when engineering can make a designer better, design better? Sometimes it seems like designers work in like local optima. How do you know, what's your thought about team organization, basically?
That's one of the major problems in our design. Usually when I'm called in as a consultant to help improve design or whatever, it turns out to be an organizational problem. And small teams work well. But a problem is each little division, whether it's designers or engineers or marketing or manufacturing or sales, thinks that they're the most important part of the process. And they don't work well together, but the way you have to do it is you bring them together. And if you can't bring them all together because then it's a big team, which doesn't work well. But if you can have a representative from each thing at all the stages. So in the early days, you need at least one person from marketing and engineering. And if it's physical, maybe manufacturing. And then maybe mostly designers. And then as it goes through the stages, you change the proportion. But you always have at least one representative from every one. When it works well, it works well. At Apple, I was very happy to be in some of the product teams where there was always a UI person, which is what we called the designers in those days, and a marketing person and engineering people. And what I really liked about it when it worked well was you even forgot which way they represented. Each of them did what they were good at, and they worked together. And so when the programmer had this brilliant new idea at 4 a.m., it used to be they would put it in and there was nothing you could do. It was too late. But now the UI person might be there right next to them and they would talk about it. And so it's having all the people together makes a big difference. But they have to learn to work as a team. And that's really hard because we speak different languages. We use the same words with different meanings. But you know, this is true. Engineers the same way. You bring a group of engineers together and they're specialists. They don't understand of the others. And this bunch of designers, we have very many different kinds of design skills. So it is hard to work in groups. But the first thing you have to do is break the silos and try to bring them across the disciplines.
Hi, Don. I'm Nikita from Bosch. And my question is, there are many consumer products that have a product cycle, like 1 year, Apple really needs a new product. But like products as cars, it won't get changed for like 10 years per person. So how do designers try to predict the near future when it's still there, when it's 10 years past? How to design for this type of needs? Is there a guideline to follow? Or?
Well, again, designers have less power than you might think in trying to decide that. But look, I think it's criminal that we believe that we should change a product every 6 months or a year. And, you know, it was automobiles that started this. Automobiles went into an annual design change, whether they needed it or not. And after every 3 or 4 years or so, they would do a major change, deliberately to make you feel old-fashioned if you drove the old car. And Apple does a really great job of, to its religious subscribers, to changing the religion and changing the codes and saying, oh, and not only do they change the model, but they change the plugs that you use. And you want to feel old, and that's bad. I love it when a product lasts for 10 years and still works well. So what we should really be trying to do is understand how to upgrade and improve the product, but keep the main thing. It's environmentally really bad that you have to always throw away the old stuff. Apple makes these things with batteries you can't replace, or at least not easily. So you have to throw it away when your battery dies, or pay a lot of money to get it fixed. That's bad. And why? Because they want to save a 1/16 of an inch in thickness. And if they were actually willing to make it an 1/8 of an inch thicker, guess what? The battery would be twice as powerful. It would last for a whole day, maybe even 2 days. But it's only the quest for thinness that kills us. So I think a lot of look, the word consumer is a bad word. We are people who consume. And so the problem comes when, well, if I sell food, that's no problem. You eat the food, you have to buy new food. Or if a newspaper, well, it's no longer news. But gee, a cell phone could last 10 years. Oh, God, that's horrible. People buy television. It used to be TV sets lasted 10 years. Not anymore. Refrigerators still last 10 years. So the refrigerator workers are trying to change that, right? It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea.